Welcome into Game Day Scoreboard. It's Monday, December 23rd. My name is Madeline Burke, and the holidays are upon us. The gift that keeps on giving this week is the slate of NFL football, with Week 17 starting with the Wednesday Christmas Day slate. Lots to monitor in the National Football League, but we start with some injury news. Eagles quarterback Jalen Hurts remains in concussion protocol after getting banged up on a running play early in Sunday's loss to the Commanders. The Eagles are back in action Sunday against the Cowboys with another chance to clinch the NFC East. Here's more from Nick Sirianni on his QB1 Monday.
He always has done a good job of protecting himself and been dynamic, both as a passer and as a runner. Yeah, anytime something goes down and you lose one of your best players, you wish they'd do something else or not take that hit. In that scenario, we always want him to. We always run runs that protect him, and we always want him to protect himself.
Over to Houston, where D'Amico Ryan says the Texans will be without wide receiver Tank Dell for the rest of the year. Dell suffered a torn ACL and dislocated kneecap. The Texans did grab wideout Deontay Johnson off waivers from the Ravens to add some depth to the position group, but Ryan's is focused on moving forward.
It's easy to sit in, and it still hurts. It'll always be there with us. I don't think, the emotional piece will leave us because, those guys are important pieces to our team and just really great people as well for our team, for our locker room, meant a lot to us. So losing them is hard. It's hard to move on, but, what's in front of us, we're here. We got the Ravens coming into our house. We have to move on. And so easier said than done.
And even when the Raiders win, they lose. The Raiders defeated the Jaguars yesterday for their first victory since September, and many of their fans are furious. That's because the quarterback-needy franchise dropped to 6th in the 2025 NFL draft order. But head coach Antonio Pierce couldn't care any less about that. Take a listen.
And look, we work 80 hours a day. All right, 80 hours a week. Staff, players come here, they're 40-plus hours to work. We don't do this to lose. We don't do this for anybody's fantasy football team. We don't do this for anybody's drafts, projections. None of that matters to us. Only thing matters is winning, and that's all we want to do.
Some other notable storylines Monday. Eagles backup quarterback Kenny Pickett suffered a rib injury in the loss to the Commanders. Texans safety Jimmy Ward out for the season with a foot injury. Steelers wide receiver George Pickens with hamstring is expected to play against the Chiefs on Wednesday, Christmas Day. Kyle Shanahan rules out offensive tackle Trent Williams for the rest of the season with an ankle injury. Now joined by CBS Sports NFL analyst Tyler Sullivan. And Tyler, things were going so well in the Philadelphia. Eagles had a 10-game win streak, the division title within their grasp, but then Jalen Hurts goes down with a concussion. They lose in the final seconds to the Commanders to keep that NFC East race alive. So, Tyler, how should the Eagles handle Hurts going into another big divisional matchup this week if he is available out of protocol?
Yeah, I would try to be as cautious as you possibly can with Jalen Hurts. And I said this even last week when we were talking about Patrick Mahomes. Now he, has an ankle sprain and runs for a 15-yard touchdown, but that's neither here nor there. We're talking about a different type of injury with Jalen Hurts, a head injury. We'll see how his status develops as the week goes on. But he is a more mobile quarterback. We obviously know the tush pushes in his mobility as they use him as a runner. So when we're talking about that, I just want to be a little bit more cautious for a player that's so important, obviously, to what Philadelphia does offensively. And as much as we want to talk about possibly getting the #1 seed, a lot of things need to fall their way for that to happen. They're pretty much locked in to the #2 seed in the NFC, and they can clinch the NFC East, that 2 seed, all of that stuff with just one win over these next couple of weeks. And so if you're telling me that Kenny Pickett needs to come in and take care of business either against Dallas or against the New York Giants in Week 17 and Week 18, I would feel confident in him being able to go at least 1-1 down that stretch. And if you want to keep Jalen Hurts in bubble wrap till the postseason, I wouldn't necessarily hate that because I think you have the pieces in place, specifically Saquon Barkley. I think this is where he could prove to be that MVP kind of player that we were talking about throughout the season. Both the Cowboys and the Giants terrible against the run. So if Kenny Pickett Pickett is the starter for one of those weeks or both, you have a player in Saquon Barkley that he can lean on, and you're not asking him to do too much.
And like you said, the playoffs are already a sure thing. They have the ability to be a little cautious here in this situation. But in even worse injury news, Texans losing Tank Dell for the rest of the season after suffering a torn ACL and a dislocated kneecap in Week 16. A sad moment and a tough play. But now the Texans did add Deontay Johnson off waivers after a shaky tenure with the Ravens. So, Tyler, how do the Texans adjust on offense with the playoffs right around the corner?
Yeah, it's a tough blow, especially for a really up-and-coming player in Tank Dell. When we've seen him on the field, he's been awesome. I mean, he's been a guy that I've been targeting in fantasy and things like that because of how electrifying he can be. Obviously goes down last year with the fractured fibula, and now this year with the torn ACL, among other injuries. You just really feel for the player, and you feel for this offense that has been ravished by injuries because you got to remember, too, they lost Stephon Diggs. They lost Nico Collins for a little bit there as well. Obviously, he's back and healthy. They bring in Deontay Johnson, but I don't know how much we can really look at Deontay Johnson as a replacement or anything along those lines for Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell because we look at this tenure with the Baltimore Ravens. He had one catch for 5 yards, and he was playing with Lamar Jackson. I don't know if you can't make it work there. I don't know where you can make it work in the NFL. Obviously, this is 4th team in a calendar year as well, so there might be something there that's beyond football and making it work within a specific offense. I commend them for going after the player because they need talent at that position, maybe try to make it work, but I am a little dubious on how much of an impact Deontay Johnson will have. I will say this, though. It is spicy that he is on the Houston Texans, and who do they play this week? The Baltimore Ravens.
There you go. We're doing it for the plot at this point in the season, right, Tyler? And meanwhile, you got Victory Monday for the Raiders. Mostly that would be a celebration, but no, Raiders fans not acting like it. Antonio Pierce with some strong words for the fans on Monday. Tyler, did the Raiders do anything wrong by winning and sliding from the #1 pick in the 2025 NFL draft all the way down to 6?
Yeah, you know what? It's one of those tug and pulls of a franchise versus its fan base. Now, I can understand both sides, right? From a fan perspective, you know that this Raiders team in 2024 is not going anywhere. You're eliminated from postseason contention. So at this point, you might as well try to find yourself a franchise quarterback. The best way to do that is by having a high draft pick. And so if all of a sudden you're winning football games relatively, quote unquote, meaninglessly with a regime that is probably not going to be here in 2025, whether that's the quarterback, the head coach, or all of the above, I can see how that's frustrating for a fan base because you want to find that quarterback. You want to be in those conversations about Shedeur Sanders or Ward out of Miami. Now you have to start talking about possibly trading up and giving up more assets to try to get into that #1, #2, #3 overall pick to get back into those conversations. So that's frustrating when you were already there. Now, on the flip side, from an organizational standpoint, from Antonio Pierce's perspective, you're not going to lose games. You're not going to go out there as a head coach that is on the hot seat and kind of buy into the tank. I don't think that players, head coaches, but specifically ex-players that are now coaches, they're not wired to lose games and listen to front offices or ownership or fans that would possibly want him to do that. Antonio Pierce is just not that guy, and not a lot of people in the NFL from that competitive standpoint are just not there. So you can see it on both sides. It's a tug and a pull, but ultimately the Raiders are going to try to win football games, and whether or not that hurts them in 2025, well, that's for the fans to kind of muster about.
Right, as we heard Antonio Pierce say earlier, listen, you don't spend 80 hours in the office going over tape, meetings, practices, and all that just to take an L, right? They're doing it to win the game. Tyler Sullivan, thanks so much for the insight, as always. CBS has a monster slate of games on tap for Week 17. We'll have you covered for all of them with post-game highlights, recaps, on-field interviews, and much more right here on CBS Sports HQ. Watch live on the CBS Sports app or stream on Paramount+.